But yeah, the AT, or the Appalachian Trail, is a wonderful experience, and it's something I decided that I wanted to do kind of on a whim a couple years ago. I've never done any backpacking before this. It was my first backpacking trip, and done a little bit of camping and hiking, but just mainly for training purposes. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country, and so I was interested in seeing more of it. This is actually the placard that marks the beginning of the trail. It's on Springer Mountain in Georgia. And so this is a picture of the full trail. This year, it changes a little bit every year, but this year it was 2,184.2 miles. And that's not including all the little side trips to waterfalls and going into town. You forget how much you use your car until you don't have it and have to walk a mile each way with your groceries. But it's something every through hiker gets used to. This is a picture of my mom in my tent. I thought it'd be good for you to see where I lived for 4.5 months. But yeah, it's a two-person tent, so it's pretty much big enough to fit a person and your backpack. This is a picture of all my gear. It changed a little bit throughout the trip, but for the most part, that's what I had for 4.5 months. And if anything, I took things away from this pile. I learned that everything you need, you can find on your back if you pack smart.
How much did it lift all that weigh?
At that point, it was about 25 pounds with food and water. Later on, I added a down jacket and some warm clothing, and it got heavier towards the end, probably in the low 30s. But by then, you're used to it. This is back at the start at Springer. I would say I took about 6 months to plan for it, and I read a lot of books, read a lot of gear reviews, and that's mainly where I spent my time. And then training, of course. I ran, did weightlifting. You realize once you get out there that nothing prepares you for backpacking like actually doing it, but anything that you can do ahead of time is really helpful. Both my parents actually started out with me. My dad did about 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks, and my mom did the first 3 days to get to Neal's Gap, which is the first major checkpoint on the trail. And this is a place where you hit your first store, you're able to send back gear, they have a post office, so all those people that bring an extra tent thinking they're going to need it, they send it back at Neal's Gap. That's kind of what it's known for. There are lots of beautiful scenic things on the trail. Lots of mountain views and just some of the most incredible views that I've ever experienced. It's a picture, you can see my dad kind of off in the distance ahead of me, but they call it the Green Tunnel because a lot of it is covered by the trees. This is a picture of a typical shelter with 2 of my hiking buddies. The guy standing and leaning is named Flash, and I hiked with him from Neal's Gap all the way to Katahdin in Maine. Not quite Katahdin. We hiked until New Hampshire together, and he did Maine a little faster than me, so he went ahead to finish. But hiked most of the trail with him. He's 6'8", and he's a gentle giant. Everybody loved Flash. He's a friendly person, but it was tough to keep up with him for a while because he has such long strides. But Flash was wonderful.
Is that his trail name? Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was gonna warn you. Flash is his trail name, just like Songbird was my trail name. His real name is Mike. Actually, Michael Small, which was amusing. Everybody's like, "Is your last name really Small? Are you really 6'8"?" And he's like, "Yeah." This next picture is a little bit gross. My heels got blisters, just like most through hikers experience some sort of thing, a setback. And for me, it was the blisters, and my heels got really torn up. And I hiked like that. Both of my heels were in that condition for a couple 100 miles. So I hiked for a couple weeks like that. And it's just something where you learn. At first you look at it, and I looked down and I was like, I don't know how I can't take another step. And then you put your boots back on because you have to. And you start walking, and your body gets used to dealing with it, and you don't notice it so much. This is actually one of the first checkpoints, and I was going to talk to you about goal setting, because if you start out with a trail and you think about hiking 2,184.2 miles, you go crazy. I've seen it broken down into footsteps. I don't remember how many it is, but I looked at that and I was like, I never want to see that again. But so for me, the easiest way to think about it, the long-term goal was Georgia to Maine, but within that, I decided to look at it from Georgia to Harper's Ferry, and so Harper's Ferry is the halfway point, and I thought that that would be a good first, a good goal. But then within that, you start thinking about your next shower and the next place to get food, because along the trail, between 4 to 7 days, I'd say, you stop and you get, you resupply on food and you take a shower and wash your clothes. And it's always very rewarding to go into town and just get a hamburger. Everybody you want a hamburger, or pizza or something like that. So, and then you have your states, so you think about the 14 states and break it down that way. And then you have a daily goal, so like every day I would decide, okay, I want to make the shelter at 28 miles. I'm going to do a 28-mile day, or 32-mile day, or a 16-mile day. And then even within that, I would set goals for myself, like, okay, in 2 hours, I need to cover 5 miles. And if I can do that, I'll give myself a Cliff Bar. Like, I'll get a Snickers bar. And for through hikers, you're always hungry. And so food is a wonderful motivator. but yeah, so this is the first state border. This is my buddy Kit Kat. If you want to talk about somebody inspirational, he started out the trail with a 75-pound pack, and he's a former Marine, but he got chiggers. I don't know if any of you have ever had chiggers, but they're quite uncomfortable. They make your legs itch, and he hiked like that. Nothing was going to stop Kit Kat. We called him Kit Kat because every time you walked up on him, he was taking a break. So we called him the King of Breaks. But this is usually how you'd find Kit Kat. He'd start a couple hours before everybody else and come in a couple hours after. But he always made it. Picture of my dad. And this is actually, it's a beautiful water source. By the time I got to the middle part of the trail and it was dry, I was missing the Georgia water sources. But you'll see pipes that are stuck into streams or into springs, and this is where that's where I get water. We took, every once in a while it's good to reward yourself with a 0 day or a 0 mile day. And so we went whitewater rafting at the NOC, and it's right along the trail, so we got off, and this is the first time that we took a full day off. And it's important when you're setting long-term goals or even immediate goals that you pace yourself and you don't push too hard in the beginning and burn out. So it's good to do fun things along the way too. I mean, the whole trip was a fun experience, and when people congratulate me, I think it's a little bit funny because I'm like, I just spent 4.5 months doing the most wonderful thing of my life. But it is important when you have challenges that you're facing to have something to look forward to. They did a race, and you can see my dad and another guy flying out of the boat. They didn't quite make it over the rapid, but this is a picture. We called ourselves the Happy Feet crew because as we were hiking, the person in front of the line would leave a smiley face in the dirt so that everyone else would see it. And it started at the top of a particularly challenging climb. Somebody left a smiley face, and I was the last person. I like to say that I was the 5th fastest instead of saying that I was the slowest, but it was really encouraging to get to that. But you have Andrew in the red shirt. I actually finished with him. I did from day 5 until Katahdin with him. Kit Kat, who was only doing the southern half, and then you have Flash in the middle, and then I'm there standing beside Porch, who is also only doing the first half. This is Fontana Dam, which is a pretty notable place on the trail. Most people have heard of it. It marks the entrance to the Smokies. This is just, I thought it'd be good for you to see trail shots. The trail varies depending on where you are. This was taken from Klingman's Dome, which is the highest point on the AT. It was a beautiful spot. We hit it right after a thunderstorm, so we didn't see a lot, but it's a really incredible view of the Smokies. This, I thought I'd show you. I took it on my way to a mountain that was not on the AT, and at the time I did not realize that. I was in the Smoky Mountains and took an 11-mile detour, and I just thought it would be good to show you and say that at times you do get sidetracked, but it's important to remember that you will get back on track and push through. This was my first really long day. I came in at 26 miles. All the guys were really confused because I just didn't show up for a couple of hours, but fortunately I had enough cell service to let them know that I was okay and just going to be a little late. This is our friend Nutella, and I'm sure you can figure out where he got his trail name from. He ate Nutella constantly and actually got the rest of us hooked on it. And at one point, for a thru hiker, they say you really need to eat between 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day to replace what you burn. And it's pretty difficult to carry enough food to do that. So you look at high fat, high calorie foods. So it took quite an adjustment when I got back from the trail to look at something and see 350 calories and not think, oh, that's eating air. But at one point I was eating a jar of Nutella and a jar of peanut butter every 4 days. This Kit Kat. This was a beautiful lookout tower, and along the trail you have lookout towers and fire towers that mark beautiful views. Something I was going to mention, there's a lot of rain on the AT, and so your stuff gets wet and it's really difficult for it to dry out. There were times that I went from when I started hiking and started sweating until I did laundry again where my shirt was never dry. And it's something that you just have to adjust to and learn to deal with. But anytime you're indoors, thru hikers are going to find a way to air all their stuff out. Plus the smell becomes a problem, especially hiking with guys. I like to think that my smell didn't matter as much compared to them, but this is a beautiful part of the trail. Somebody took so much time to create this, and it really shows what a supportive group of volunteers can accomplish. And the trail is run by volunteers, and so somebody took the time out of their schedule to build this, to make this an easier ascent for hikers. And so it's just a wonderful organization, and there's so much support along the way. This is another example of that. This is Trail Magic, and so there are people that will give basically trailside support. So they'll come and place a cooler with cold drinks, or I've seen fruit. Sometimes I heard rumors of things as elaborate as cookouts. So they'd hike up somewhere and have hot dogs and hamburgers. But I started May 28th, and so I was behind the bulk of the crowd the whole time. Typically, people are starting right now. It's exciting to think about a whole new batch of thru hikers that are reaching Springer, probably even this week and starting out. But I was behind the crowd, and something that's interesting, from the first day I was told, you'll never make it. People constantly, throughout the first week, they said, oh, you're just getting started, you're crazy. There's no way that you can make it to Maine in this short amount of time. But fortunately, I was with a group of very positive and very determined people, and together we were able to push ourselves. It took a lot of 14-hour days. We'd hike 14 hours, 12-hour days. We did night hiking, so we'd hike, wake up and get going before sunrise, and then hike until after the sunset for a couple hours. The longest day we came in at 35 miles. So it's something where when you're criticized and people tell you that you can't do something, you have two choices. And for me, it was a great motivator, and I was able to say, all those people that have told me it's not possible, I'm going to prove them wrong. The white blaze that you see on the post marks the trail, and so you'll see those constantly probably every quarter mile. It depends on where you are, sometimes more frequent, sometimes less frequent. Just the group, you can kind of see everybody's personality there. And the trail does go through several towns. This is Hot Springs, North Carolina, and you can see the AT logo on the sidewalk. So you actually hike right through the middle of town. It's always a special treat when this happens because it allows you to resupply without having to walk the 2 miles to get somewhere. But this is where my blisters finally healed. So everything that you've seen to this point, I had those heel blisters. If you're ever hiking, sock liners do wonders. They're like really thin socks, and that's what finally fixed it for me. But sometimes you get tired, but you just have to learn to push through. Fortunately, this isn't a very well-traveled road, but I saw his sweatband on the white lines, and I couldn't help myself. I had to take a picture. see lots of beautiful wildlife. And this is interesting because this spot is the first spot that I ever hiked on the AT. And I went with a group of friends and did a 1 mile hike to Round Bald. And so it was really a wonderful moment to come back there a couple years later and know that I was fulfilling, on my way to fulfilling my goal. And it's really an incredible spot. So I'm sure seeing this, you can understand why you'd think, man, I've got to do more of this. But it's one of the most beautiful spots.
Is that North Carolina?
That's on the Tennessee-North Carolina line. It's right by Roan Mountain. And Roan Mountain is, I think, the tallest point on the trail, actually, at a little more than, I think, 6,200 feet. Katahdin in Maine rivals it, but I think Roan is a little taller. Beautiful waterfalls, swimming holes. So we had a lot of fun, too. It's not like everything was hard work. Now this is going into Virginia. So at this point I'd done Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and I was on to Virginia. Virginia is a 500-mile state, and it can be a tough one because a lot of people spend 5-6 weeks even in Virginia. But because of the pace that we were having to keep, we did it in 3 weeks. So I got to skip the Virginia blues, as they call it, and I love the state. There are wild horses, so they just come up to you. You can feed them. And as you can see, I was just so excited about the horses. I talked about them for days, before and after, until they tried to eat the food out of my food bag, and that was a problem. You don't touch a hiker's food bag. So, people ask about snakes a lot, and yes, there are snakes. This one lives in the shelter that we were staying at that night. So, needless to say, instead of sleeping in the shelter, we all decided to pitch our tents. But that was an especially impressive snake. This was the first time that we hiked out before sunrise. So before this, it had been a more relaxed pace, and at this point we realized that in order to do the whole trail, we really needed to start moving and start getting the miles in. But before that, it was a more leisurely pace. Flash had already walked a hole in his shoes at this point. He had some planning problems and didn't get his shoes replaced for a while. He has a size 15 foot, which makes it quite difficult to find shoes anywhere. So he had some problems because he didn't plan out his mail drops. And basically mail drops, so like my mom sent me packages to support me along the way, things that I needed, like another toothbrush, or things that would be hard to find in towns, that kind of thing. We walked through a lot of beautiful countryside, cow pastures, you name it. We walked under power lines, alongside roads, through towns. Just got to see a wonderful array of the country. This is one of my favorite spots. It's McAfee's Knob near Catawba, Virginia, and it's one of the most popular spots on the trail, and one of the most widely photographed. And there's a beautiful rock where you can sit on the edge and you feel like you're about to fall off the edge of the earth. And my mom actually sent me a mail drop to Catawba, and she started looking at Google images of the trail when she typed in the word, and she saw hikers on the edge of the cliff, and she has a pretty extreme fear of heights. And she said, honey, I don't want to hear about it until after it's over. You can show me pictures, but I don't want to know when you're going to get to that spot. I just want to know that you survived it. But I loved watching the rainstorms come in. You hike rain or shine. Depending on how fast you need to move, you can have more flexibility, but I hiked through all sorts of weather. Snow, sleet, rain, sunshine. Blackberries, I love the blackberries. When you're hungry and you have to carry all your food on your back, anytime it's just growing on the side of the trail, it's a wonderful treat. And that's another thing that I was going to mention, actually, going back to the blackberries. This is something that I wouldn't have been able to experience if I would have been hiking with the crowd, because they wouldn't have been ripe and in season. And so even though the way that I did it was a little bit more challenging in some ways, there were lots of wonderful opportunities that arose through that. And wonderful things like I hiked with mainly college students, and so I was naturally put with people in my age group. And also I didn't have to deal with the large crowds, because in the beginning you'll have a lot of times 15 people trying to sleep in a shelter that holds 8. And so that was a really wonderful thing. Went through a lot of drought in this section of the country, had trouble finding water, but it's one of those things that's just all about planning. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was the supportive community that you find along the Appalachian Trail. And it's really a wonderful thing because you're helped by strangers constantly. Through trail magic, you can trust people that you see. And I know during the drought at one point, Flash hiked past someone who said he hadn't seen water in 10 miles and he'd been out of water. And Flash had 3 liters of water on him and gave the guy 2 of the liters, knowing that he wouldn't see water again for another 10 miles. And really just goes to show that when people, it's a community where people could be really stingy with the resources that they have, but instead everyone shares and it works out for the good of everyone. I wish that everyday life could be that simple. This is a bear. I saw lots of bears along the way, most of them in a 3-day period while I hiked the Shenandoahs, because the Shenandoahs also have a lot of human population. It's a very traveled area, and the bears learn that if they stick around, they can be fed. So you'll see a couple more bear pictures. This is the halfway point. It's Harper's Ferry, and it's a great checkpoint because you get your picture taken and logged in a book. Just more scenic shots. Finally reached the Mason-Dixon, which was also exciting because it was great to start seeing things that were very northeastern. And I know one of the things that marked it for me, I went in, I'd been ordering sausage biscuits when I went to town, and I asked for a sausage biscuit, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, "You want a biscuit?" And I was like, well, clearly I'm not in the South anymore. But this is the half-gallon challenge, which is a wonderful reward on the trail. You eat a half-gallon of ice cream as quickly as you can. For me, I decided not to fully accept the challenge, and just the goal for me was to eat it before it melted, which took me about 35-40 minutes. But I ended up with Moose Tracks, which has a lot of peanut butter, so that was my excuse. People that do chocolate and vanilla, it's easier to eat quickly. This is a timber rattler in Pennsylvania, and funny story with this, Flash actually looked over at me and he said, "Hey Songbird, come here, but watch your footing." So I climbed up on the rock beside him and looked down to see this very large timber rattler sunning himself. And I said, "Flash, I got to get a picture of this." And I was carrying a DSLR camera, so with the attached lenses, and so it was a little bit of an ordeal for me to get it out of my pack. So I asked him to step to a lower rock so I could put my pack down. And anyway, he almost stepped on this guy. So there was another timber rattler there, and so he looked at me with panic in his voice and said, "Songbird, there's another one." So I was tugging him up on the rock, and it was a pretty exciting moment. Fortunately, one that wasn't replicated, and we did not see that many more snakes in like stepping range. Most of them were on the side of the trail. But everybody likes to have a little fun. We saw these signs and realized that the hike, probably meant to be adult child, was about accurate between me and Flash. So, Pennsylvania. But this is a breakfast hike. So we hiked to sunrise. So we left at, I think, 4:15 in the morning to see the sunrise. And Andrew loved the Snickers that are like the almond, and so that was his breakfast reward. You could tell how soon we'd been to town, how recently, because of how many Snickers we had in our pack. Everybody would eat them quickly. He looks a little like a ghost here because he was moving so fast. Actually, it's probably a camera focusing thing, but I just wanted to show you the variety. So this is, a lot of times the bridges going over marshlands would be the 2x4s set down, but then you also see wonderful things like this. This is in New Jersey, a beautiful walkway that went on for like a mile and is volunteer built. Crossing into New York, it's the Lemon Squeezer. So it's a tight spot, you gotta take your pack off. Took a couple days, went into New York City. And let me tell you, it was fun to walk around New York City with my hiking gear. And Andrew had a big walking stick, and we were just total outsiders. And it takes a lot to be noticed in a city like New York, and we were noticed. I've never had so much space on the subway. Nobody wanted to be near us. Going into Connecticut. This is Rob Bird, a hiker, like a volunteer that accepts hikers into his home, and one of the most kind and generous people that I've ever met. And there were people like him all along the trail. We're in Vermont now. and you start seeing signs, like I would start seeing Katahdin 500 miles. And I remember when I reached the 100-mile mark and I was ecstatic, and then here I was 500 miles from the goal, and it was just a really neat feeling. Because looking back, 100 miles in the beginning was nothing, but at the time, that felt as important as when I hit the 1,000-mile mark. Going into New Hampshire. New Hampshire has the White Mountains. Oh, this is a little privy humor. You would see all sorts of things along the way, and privy humor is quite popular. People write funny things in the privies for people's amusement. This is in the White Mountains. Moose tracks. I was really excited about seeing a moose. I only saw one from a distance, but they were in rut, so it was probably a good thing that I was a little ways away. But the whites are tough, but they're beautiful. That's looking over Franconia Ridge, and then so something else I was going to mention. It's a wonderful feeling to see something 20 miles off and be able to identify it. Be like, that's Mount Washington, and then later that day stand and see the spot that you saw it from in the beginning, so you can kind of look over the mountains and see the ridge line and figure out where you've come. And it wasn't something that I got to experience that frequently, but anytime I did, it was a really wonderful and rewarding thing. It's always nice to look back and see where you came from and then be able to see what's ahead. But this is one of my favorite spots on the trail. It's a mile of alpine zone, and so there are no trees, you're above tree line, and the views are spectacular. Unfortunately, the weather can be tough and challenging at times, just because you have nothing to block you from the wind or the rain. You get caught in a lightning storm in alpine zone and you're going to have some trouble. But with smart planning and just being aware of your surroundings, you're able to avoid that and put yourself in safe situations. Now, off in the distance, you can see the tallest mountain there is Mount Washington, which is an exciting thing because it's one of the tallest mountains in the Northeast, if not the tallest mountain. And so the hike to that was really exciting. Beautiful weather through here. We had about 50-50 in the white. Some of it was beautiful. We had a lot of tough rain, but that's pretty good considering the weather they normally see. And we hit peak foliage while we were on what's considered by many to be the most spectacular part of the trail. So that was really exciting. The foliage was really beautiful. This is the trail that leads up to Mount Washington. Didn't take pictures at the end because the weather got really challenging, but they have a lodge on top where people can ride the cog railway, which I'd actually done as a child. So I'd been up there once before and I'd taken a train. So it was a really neat experience because at 7 years old I had no idea that I would be back to that spot and that I would have actually climbed Mount Washington. So it was a really neat feeling to be back in that room. And they had hot dogs and the weather was awful, so I think we spent 4 more hours than we planned sitting there just stuffing our faces and recovering a little bit. This is my picture at the summit. You can see the weather was quite challenging, and Mount Washington is known for having some of the worst weather in America, just because something about the way the fronts meet each other at the spot, it's really challenging weather. We ended up that night, you can see ice on the edge of Andrew's sleeping mat and on the bottom of the tent surface, and it was that cold inside of the tent. And so outside of the tent, it was just very cold. It was one of our first hypothermia scares. We had a couple more throughout the Northeast, just because this is where the trail goes from being something that is fun and enjoyable to something where you actually really do need to know what you're doing and make sure that you're properly equipped. But you get rewarded with views like this, and it's pretty hard to complain when you're looking at things that beautiful. This is the New Hampshire-Maine state line. It was an exciting checkpoint because it was it was the very last time that you cross into a new state, so that was exciting. You can see I have the bandana under my knee. Unfortunately, I was having knee trouble at that point, and so that's something that I dealt with in moderate levels to the end of my trip. But it's something where you learn what your body can handle and you push through it. Celebratory Snickers. You can see he's always either with Snickers or a jug of chocolate milk. When we go into town, he would drink a half gallon of chocolate milk. That was like his celebration. This is Mahoosuc's Notch. It's a boulder field that goes on for a mile. And those boulders, if you can see, there's a white blaze on the rock in the center, and that would have come up to about my fast you hike it. I think it took me 2.5. But it's a challenging place, but it's also a lot of fun. So it really depends on how you want to approach it. Some people see it and they're like, oh gosh, this is just going to be awful. But if you look at it and you're like, okay, well, it's a chance to, like, it's a maze, you know, it'll be fun. It's a lot more positive. I actually raced another hiker through it. I got an hour-and-a-half head start on Andrew, and he caught me at the last boulder. My goal was to finish right before him, but he caught up with me. He said he started an hour behind me, but I think he might have exaggerated a little bit. First time we saw snow, throwing a snowball on top of Saddleback Mountain. Andrew wasn't really tickled about the snow, and neither was I, just because it's another challenge, and it was cold. This is the 2,000-mile mark, which is especially exciting because there's something about hearing the thousands where it's really rewarding. Beautiful views through here. In Maine, you actually have to do a fair amount of hiking through rivers and creeks and through water. So that was always a challenge. Here, the day before it had snowed, and this wasn't the highest one. The highest one, I think, went up to my waist and almost touched the bottom of my pack. So you get out of that and have to just keep hiking. It rained 18 out of the 23 days that I was in Maine, and it was quite cold. Boots were never dry. I actually had a little bit of a problem with trench foot, which it's funny, you hear that and you don't think that everybody's like, trench foot, does that even exist anymore? But I started having symptoms of trench foot, had to dry out my boots, take a day off. That's another thing, you have to learn when to push yourself and when to listen to your body and take the time that you need. Eventually you learn, we had dry boots on this day, and so all of us made it across this stream without getting our boots wet. So you learn creative solutions to dealing with problems. My mom actually hiked, this is on Katahdin, which is the last mountain, and my mom hiked it with me, which was incredible. She has a fear of heights, and I really respect her for wanting to do this with me, especially when you see what you face towards the top. This isn't even the whole mountain. This is about a 1-mile stretch. And for someone who's terrified of heights, when you look over the edge, it looks like the world's about to fall off. I've been hiking for months, and I was pretty nervous, but she pushed through. At one point she said, I don't think I can do it, and I looked at her and I was like, Mom, you're not going to ruin this for me. I was like, I'm really sorry, this was our agreement when you hiked this last part. I hate to be selfish, but I hiked, at that point, I think it was like 2,182 miles. I was like, there's no way I'm going to not see. It's basically a pilgrimage to get to a sign on the top of this mountain. I was like, you're not going to keep me from the sign, are you? And she's like, no. She said, well, I'll just hike down. I said, Mom, I won't enjoy it. I'm going to be worried about you freezing the whole time. So then she looked at me and then looked at the challenge and actually said, YOLO. And we continued on. But she reached the summit and she was so glad that she did. This is, Mo Duckets is in the middle. We met him a couple weeks before the end of the trail. He's from Birmingham, so that was exciting. But these were our finishing pictures. Everybody said that we would never be able to do it. I left May 28th, 8 days after I graduated from college in New York, and then I finished the trail on October the 23rd. So 8 days after the official cutoff, but they let me hike Katahdin anyway. We had a good day. When someone tells you you can't do something, I like to turn around, and I had to get up there in a swimsuit. You know, it was probably 20 degrees, but I had my Wonder Woman swimsuit. It was my lucky suit in college. I was a diver on our varsity diving team, and so I figured it only appropriate that I finish in my lucky suit and in a swimsuit, since everyone said it was impossible. So yeah, so that's actually the end of my presentation. We have about 10 minutes left, and I thought I would just answer questions that anybody had.